Welcome to EyeOnBusiness. I'm Kevin McDonald and I'm your host. Today I'm actually visiting Henderson, Nevada with Charlie Sundling, who's the CEO of Pipeline Software. And I'm going to let Charlie explain to you today why he now lives in Henderson, Nevada. And we're just going to have a conversation about the challenges of the economy today and what it's like to be a CEO of a software company. Charlie, I'd like you to explain to us why you now live in Henderson, Nevada.
Sure. So we moved to Henderson here about 4 months ago, and the primary reason for moving, there were a couple of different reasons, but certainly one of the motivations were the taxes that we were paying, state income taxes in California. Also, for the type of business that we're in, it doesn't really matter where I live. I do a lot of traveling to the Middle East, to Europe. So working out of Las Vegas or working out of California was kind of irrelevant.
So if you were you born and raised in California, or do you come from somewhere else? How long did you spend in California?
Yeah, no, I'm from Chicago originally, but I've been in California on and off for about 25 years.
So it was quite the change for you to leave California.
Yeah, it was a big change. It wasn't a huge difference because I have moved around the world quite a bit, but they've always kind of called California home.
So is your business still based there?
Yes.
Is there a plan to move that in eventually, or you know?
Yeah, in fact, we've been looking at it because the reality is that the business tax impact and business operating cost impact is much greater than my personal taxes and costs, but moving a company is a little bit harder than moving an individual.
So for those who assume that business people are just rich and they're just greedy, why don't you explain in more layman terms what you mean by the cost of running business in California, say, versus Nevada?
Yeah, I think one way to explain it, and kind of how I talk to folks that question the validity of moving to a different state because of tax reasons, is really this, that when your income is $50,000 and below, it doesn't really matter, at least in my opinion, where you live in the U.S. because the taxes are nominal. When you're above a couple million, again, the taxes are big, but relative to your income and relative to what it costs to live somewhere, there's still not a huge impact. But when you're anywhere in the middle, that's where you feel, I think, the most pain. So the relative amount of income tax that's paid and what you get to take home, that's where you really start to feel the pinch, is if you want to call it the middle class. I guess that'd be a good way to kind of identify this sector.
So I mean, I know in California, as a result of the fiscal crisis too, there's discussions now about adding service taxes and additional costs to businesses and making it even more challenging. I kind of thought this would be a really good place for you to speak for some of the folks that are still there, to the legislature, why it's a mistake and why you think that there's a lot more people like you that are getting ready to leave.
Yeah, there's a lot of pieces to it, and the one thing I wanted to make sure of is I do love the state of California. My wife loves it. It's a beautiful place to live, but it's got some substantial problems. And there's also this matter of principle. That's not the sole reason that we moved, but certainly matter of principle plays in here, that I'm not a big fan of tax regimes, heavy tax regimes. In the first place, California is definitely, in the United States, one of the heaviest, getting heavier. Taxes on capital gains, for example, so it's not just regular income, and I think that's where the state legislature needs to look a little bit harder, because my understanding is they've traditionally made the majority of their revenue from large capital gains spike back in the dot-com days, which then increased the budgets and they never brought their spending back in line. Well, capital gains to an entrepreneur is probably the biggest element of your income, because one day you will become liquid, hopefully. Right. One day you're going to sell your company, and there's where there's a big difference, because now you're talking about something you may have spent the last 20 years building. You're finally going to sell it, and the state's going to come in and tax all those gains as if it were regular income, by the way, at a higher rate than the federal government.
And without any allowance for all of the investment that you've made, all of the gambles and the risks that you've taken, all of the other people that have been employed by you.
Right.
I think that's very frustrating for many business owners, and it's becoming more and more difficult for people to even argued that it makes sense to start a business.
Yeah, it's there's zero consideration that's given for what I'll call your basis of your share price. So as you found a company, you've got a basis of zero. Mm-hmm. When you go to sell it, all of the gain from zero to whatever it's sold for is treated as capital gain taxable income. What is not accounted for are, as you said, the real investments that were made, the risks that were taken, not even counting the jobs and things you created, because arguably that was part of the business operation, but massive risks that were taken are not counted in the basis. So again, you're taxed substantially more heavily on that gain than, what I've always said is, if you want to tax my E-Trade account or my Schwab account, capital, feel free, please do. But entrepreneurial-based founding stock is a different animal, and it should be treated differently. And in a lot of countries, by the way, it is.
I was just about to ask you that. I know that we've had conversations in the past, with China and Vietnam and South Korea and some of these other countries that are beginning or are actually on the road of growing and becoming first world nations when it comes to competing with America. Where do you see the difference? Why does it make sense anymore to do business in the United States versus going and starting a business somewhere else?
Well, from a national perspective, you're hitting on another very important area. Nationally, there are a lot of incentives that these countries give. One example is in China. If you start an outsourcing business, it is absolutely tax-free in the first 5 years of its existence, which makes sense because you want to give that business a chance to grow and get itself established and hopefully be even bigger, so that when the tax kicks in, it's based on a higher level of income.
So why are we seeing such a trend towards businesses doing business outside of the United States?
Well, I think a good part of that is just the tax structure, business structures. What you're also seeing is not just new companies starting outside the U.S. You're seeing U.S. companies either moving out of the U.S. or opening foreign offices. And a lot of this has been going on for a while, and there's nothing wrong with it. These are ways that large companies in particular can create development centers and cost centers outside the U.S., which gives them a tax benefit, which, by the way, is one thing that small companies can't do because you don't have the sophistication and the tools and, quite frankly, a reason to open big offices overseas. I think when you look at the U.S., there are these questions about, is it more difficult to open a company here, to get one going? I don't think that it is. I think that the U.S. is still extremely conducive to new company formation. Certainly capital, access to capital still is the best here. But very rapidly, these countries are getting very smart about enticing businesses to either move their entire operations overseas or at least substantial pieces. An example is China. They offer you a 5-year tax exemption on any income for the first 5 years if you open a service outsourcing business. And the idea there being is you don't want to tax a company in its infancy stage. You want to wait until it's got substantial revenue and has been established.
Give them their working capital, allow them to run.
And now you have more to tax. And now you have more jobs. And now you've got more intellectual property, right? So there's Ireland, I think, is a phenomenal example. And if you look at Europe in general, there's a lot of folks that say Ireland's taken kind of a tax competitive perspective against the rest of Europe. But what they've done is they've lowered corporate taxes, and it's a phenomena known as the Celtic Tiger. They've had a phenomenal explosive growth in technology companies. And one of the main reasons was they don't try to take more than the tax they need for the early stages, from the early stages of the business.